Welcome to my channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. They say the Mississippi never forgets. That old river has seen everything: wars, floods, the rise and fall of entire civilizations along its banks. But what happened in Cairo, Illinois last October? Even the river tried to run from that. Before I tell you what I saw that night, let me ask you something. When was the last time you really looked at water? I mean, really looked at it. The way it moves, always forward, always seeking the lowest point. It's one of those constants we take for granted, like gravity or the sun rising in the east. Water flows downhill. Rivers run to the sea. These are facts as old as the earth itself, until they're not. If you're still listening after what I'm about to tell you, well, maybe you're braver than I thought. Or maybe, like me, you need to know that someone else out there has seen the impossible too. Either way, grab something to hold on to, because once you know what's possible, once you've seen the rules of nature break, you can never quite trust the world the same way again. Cairo, Illinois isn't the kind of place you visit on purpose. You end up there by accident, or because your GPS took a wrong turn, or in my case, because your editor at the Tribune thinks a fluff piece about America's forgotten river towns will fill some space in the Sunday edition. I pulled into town on October 23rd, around 4 in the afternoon. The sun was already starting to lean toward the horizon, painting everything in that particular shade of autumn gold that makes even dying things look beautiful. Cairo sits at the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, a tongue of land pointing south where two giants meet. Population these days, maybe 2,000 souls, if you're generous with your counting. The Magnolia Manor Bed and Breakfast sat on Washington Avenue, a Victorian relic from when Cairo thought it would be the next Chicago. Mrs. Eleanor Hutchins ran the place. 70-something years old with silver hair pulled back so tight it gave her a permanent look of surprise. You're the reporter from Chicago. Not a question. Small towns always know you're coming before you arrive. Tom Morrison. I offered my hand. Thanks for having me on such short notice. She looked at my hand for a moment before shaking it. Her fingers were ice cold despite the warm afternoon. Room's ready. Dinner's at 6. We don't serve after 6:30. The room was on the 3rd floor. Small but clean, with a window that looked out toward the rivers. I could see them from here, the Mississippi and the Ohio, meeting in a swirl of brown and gray water. Something about the view made me uneasy, though I couldn't say why. Maybe it was the way the currents seemed to fight each other at the confluence, like two animals circling before a fight. Dinner was quiet. Just me, Mrs. Hutchins, and an older gentleman named Carl, who apparently lived there full-time. We ate pot roast in near silence, the only sound the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. "You picked an interesting time to visit," Carl finally said, not looking up from his plate. "How's that?" He glanced at Mrs. Hutchins, who gave him a look I couldn't read. "Just, October can be unpredictable around here. Weather changes fast near the rivers." I tried to draw him out more, but he went back to his pot roast, and Mrs. Hutchins started clearing plates with the efficiency that suggested dinner conversation was over. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house made sounds. Old houses always do. But these were different. A creaking that seemed too rhythmic, too deliberate, like breathing. Around midnight, I gave up and went to the window. The moon was full, turning the rivers silver. And that's when I saw it for the first time. Just for a second, but long enough to make me doubt my eyes. The water at the confluence. It seemed to pause, like a film stopping mid-frame. Then it resumed, flowing normally. I told myself it was a trick of the light. Tired eyes. Too much coffee on the drive down. I should have left then, packed my bag and driven back to Chicago in the dark. But I didn't, because journalists are curious creatures, and curiosity, well, it's killed more than just cats. The next morning, I met Marcus Washington at the Cairo Public Library. Marcus was the unofficial town historian. Had been since he retired from teaching high school 20 years ago. If anyone could give me good material for my article, it would be him. Cairo's got more history per square inch than any town in Illinois, he said, pulling out box after box of old photographs. This was going to be the great city of the American confluence. Bigger than St. Louis, they said. Richer than Memphis. We spent hours going through the archives. Photos of steamboats, of the Civil War fort, of the Great Flood of 1937. But I kept coming back to one image, a photograph from 1892 showing the river confluence. There was something wrong with it, something my brain couldn't quite process. Marcus, I held up the photo. Look at the water here, the current patterns. He took the photo, studied it, then quickly put it back in the box. Optical illusion. Old cameras did that sometimes with moving water. But I'd seen his face change, just for a moment. Has anyone ever reported unusual behavior in the rivers here? Unusual how? I chose my words carefully. Changes in current. Water moving in unexpected ways. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to the window that overlooked the confluence. You know what makes Cairo special, Tom? It's not just where two rivers meet, it's where they fight. The Ohio's trying to push east. The Mississippi wants to go south, right there. He pointed to where the waters mixed. Right there is a battle that's been going on for 10,000 years, but they both flow south eventually. Eventually. He turned back to me, but not always willingly. That afternoon, I walked down to Fort Defiance State Park, where you can stand at the actual point where the rivers meet. The park was empty, except for an elderly woman sitting on a bench, feeding bread to seagulls that seemed reluctant to come close. "You're the reporter," she said without looking at me. Did everyone in this town know who I was? "Just doing a story on river towns," she laughed, a dry sound like leaves scraping concrete. That's what the last one said, and the one before that. There were other reporters. Oh, yes. Every few years, someone comes asking questions. They never publish their stories, though. She threw another piece of bread. The seagulls stayed where they were. Some things are better left unwritten. I sat down beside her. What kind of things? She finally looked at me. Her eyes were milky with cataracts, but I had the unsettling feeling she could see me perfectly. You ever hear of the New Madrid earthquakes, young man? 1811 and 1812. Biggest quakes in American history. Made the Mississippi run backward. That's what the history books say, but they only tell half the truth. She stood up, scattering the remaining bread. The river ran backward, yes, but it wasn't because of the earthquake. The earthquake was because of what made the river run backward. She walked away before I could ask what she meant. That evening, I sat in my room, transcribing my notes. The sun was setting again, painting the rivers red. I watched the confluence, trying to see what had bothered me about that old photograph. Then I realized. The debris in the water, the leaves and branches that should have been flowing downstream, in the photo, they were moving upstream, against the current. All of them. I was still staring at the photograph when the lights went out. The power outage wasn't unusual. Mrs. Hutchins had warned me the old wiring was temperamental, but the timing felt deliberate, like the house itself was trying to hide something. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate to the window. The moon was rising, not quite full anymore, but bright enough to see the rivers. And that's when everything I thought I knew about the world changed. The rivers were flowing backward, not metaphorically, not as an optical illusion. The Mississippi and Ohio rivers were flowing upstream, against gravity, against nature, against every law of physics I'd learned in school. I stood frozen, watching debris. Entire tree branches moving north and east, fighting their way against the natural order. The water itself seemed darker, thicker, like molten metal under the moonlight. Then I heard it, a sound like nothing I'd ever experienced. It started low, almost below hearing. A vibration you felt in your bones more than heard with your ears. It was coming from the rivers, or maybe from beneath them. A groaning, grinding sound, like the earth itself was trying to speak. I grabbed my camera, started recording. My hands were shaking so badly the image was barely stable, but I had to document this. Had to have proof. The sound grew louder. Windows throughout the house began to rattle. Downstairs I heard Mrs. Hutchins moving around, speaking in a low, urgent voice to someone. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The rivers paused, holding their breath for one impossible moment, and then they resumed their normal flow, as if nothing had happened. I ran downstairs, my phone still recording. Mrs. Hutchins was in the parlor with Carl and 3 other people I didn't recognize. They all turned to look at me, and the expression on their faces, "You saw," Mrs. Hutchins said. It wasn't a question. The rivers, they were flowing backward, yes. She moved to the window, looking out at the now normal confluence. It happens every October 24th, has for as long as anyone can remember. That's impossible. Carl laughed, but there was no humor in it. Lot of impossible things in this world, son. Cairo just happens to be where they congregate. One of the strangers, a middle-aged woman with deep-set eyes, spoke up. You're not the first outsider to witness it. Won't be the last. Question is, what are you going to do about it? I'm going to report it. This is the story of the century. They all exchanged looks. No, Mrs. Hutchins said quietly. You're not. You can't stop me from... We're not going to stop you. She turned back to me, and in the moonlight she looked older than before. Ancient. But think about it, Mr. Morrison. Who would believe you? A river flowing backward? Without any earthquake, any natural explanation. They'd think you were insane. I have video. Video can be faked. Everyone knows that these days. I looked at my phone. The video was there, but already it looked wrong. Too dark, too shaky. It could have been anything. Waves, maybe. A trick of the light. Why? I asked. Why does this happen? The woman with the deep-set eyes answered. Some say it's punishment. Cairo was built on sacred Native American burial grounds. Some say it's a warning, that one day the reversal will last longer than a few minutes. And some say, she paused, some say it's the rivers trying to escape from something downstream. Something that hasn't arrived yet but will. That's insane. Is it? Mrs. Hutchins walked to an old cabinet, pulled out a leather journal. This is the record. Every October 24th since 1853, when folks started writing it down. Before that, the oral histories go back further. The Mississippian culture that built the mounds, they knew. That's why they left. I took the journal, flipped through it. Entry after entry, all describing the same thing. The rivers reversing, the sound from beneath. And something else. Every few decades, someone would disappear on October 24th. Always someone who'd been near the water when it happened. My grandmother, Carl said quietly, was down at the confluence in 1957 when it happened. She saw something in the backward flowing water. Never would say what, but she never went near the rivers again. Died in her sleep exactly 1 year later, October 24th, 1958. People need to know about this, I insisted. Do they? Mrs. Hutchins took the journal back. What good would it do? Make Cairo a tourist attraction for ghost hunters and conspiracy theorists? We've survived by keeping quiet, by letting the rivers have their moment and then moving on. I wanted to argue, but something in their faces stopped me. These weren't crazy people. They were tired of carrying a secret that no one would believe. "There's more," the woman with deep-set eyes said. "The reversals are getting longer. Used to be just a few seconds. Now it's minutes, and the sound, it's getting louder." "What happens when it doesn't stop?" I asked. No one answered. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Everything I thought I knew about reality had been shattered. I sat at the window watching the rivers, waiting to see if it would happen again. Around 3 in the morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Tom Morrison?" "Yes." "This is Dr. Patricia Vance from the U.S. Geological Survey. I understand you witnessed an event tonight in Cairo." My blood ran cold. "How did you—" "Mr. Morrison, I need you to listen very carefully. Do not publish anything about what you saw. Do not post about it online. Do not even discuss it with anyone outside of Cairo. You know about this? The government knows?" There was a long pause. "We monitor certain anomalies. Cairo is one of them. Has been since 1953. 1953? You've known for 70 years and haven't told anyone? Mr. Morrison, there are things in this world that exist outside our current understanding of physics. Publishing them would cause panic without providing any useful information. We can't explain it. We can't prevent it. All we can do is monitor and hope it remains contained." "Contained? What does that mean?" "The phenomenon is localized. It affects only the immediate area of the confluence. As long as it stays that way, and if it doesn't," another pause, "then we have bigger problems than public panic. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to send you some information, classified information. After you read it, you'll understand why this needs to stay secret." The email came through minutes later. Attached were documents, photographs, readings from instruments I didn't recognize. But one thing stood out: a map showing other locations around the world where similar anomalies had been detected. There were dozens of them. One document was a transcript from 1961. A Soviet submarine in the Baltic Sea reported water flowing upward, straight up into the air, for 3 minutes before crashing back down. The entire crew was found dead a week later. Cause of death, unknown. Another from Japan, 1998. A lake that emptied itself completely, the water flowing uphill into the mountains, then returning hours later carrying things, artifacts that predated human civilization. And then the theoretical papers, scientists trying to explain the impossible. Phrases like temporal membrane weakness and dimensional bleed-through and gravitational pole reversal. All of it boiling down to, we don't know, and we're terrified. The last document was a prediction model. According to their calculations, the events were accelerating, not just in Cairo, but globally. The reversals were lasting longer, happening more frequently. The projected date for what they called total systematic failure was October 24th, 2029, 5 years from now. I looked back out at the rivers. They flowed normally now, peacefully even. But I could never see them the same way again. They weren't just rivers anymore. They were wounds in reality, barely held closed, threatening to tear open at any moment. The next morning, I packed my things. Mrs. Hutchins didn't seem surprised. "You're leaving earlier than planned." "Story's not working out. My editor wants me back." She nodded. "For what it's worth, Mr. Morrison, you handled it better than most. The last reporter who saw it, well, he's in a facility in Springfield now, insists the water is coming for him." "Is it?" I asked, only half joking. She didn't answer. As I drove out of Cairo, I looked in my rearview mirror one last time. The town looked peaceful, normal even. Just another dying river town in southern Illinois. But I knew better now. I knew that every October 24th, the impossible happens. The rivers flow backward. The earth groans. And something we don't understand and can't explain, tests the boundaries of our world. I never published the story, how could I? But I check the date obsessively now, and every October 24th, wherever I am, I stay away from the water, all water. Because the documents Dr. Vance sent me made one thing very clear: it's spreading. The reversals aren't just happening in Cairo anymore. Last week, I got a call from Mrs. Hutchins. First time I'd heard from her since I left. It lasted 17 minutes this year, she said without preamble. And Tom, we saw things in the water, things moving against the current that weren't debris. What kind of things? Things that looked back at us. She hung up before I could ask more. That call from Mrs. Hutchins haunted me for days. Things that looked back at us. What did that mean? I'd convinced myself over the past year that what I'd witnessed in Cairo was some kind of geological anomaly. Strange, yes, but ultimately explainable. The idea that there was something intelligent in those backward-flowing waters changed everything. I couldn't let it go. 3 weeks after her call, I found myself driving south on Interstate 57, heading back to Cairo. I told myself I was going to get closure, to ask the questions I should have asked the first time. But deep down, I knew the truth. I needed to see it again. I needed to know if what Mrs. Hutchins had said was real. The town looked different in late autumn. The trees were skeletal now, their bare branches reaching toward a gray sky like desperate fingers. The Magnolia Manor seemed smaller somehow, diminished, as if the weight of its secrets was slowly crushing it down. Mrs. Hutchins didn't seem surprised to see me. She never did. "You came back," she said, opening the door before I could knock. "They always come back, eventually. I need to know what you saw." She studied my face for a long moment, then stepped aside to let me in. The house felt colder than I remembered, and there was a smell in the air, like wet earth and something else, something organic and ancient. "Carl passed 2 weeks ago," she said without preamble. "I'm sorry, how?" "In his sleep. Natural causes," the doctor said, but he was mumbling about the water right up until the end. Said he could hear it calling. She led me to the parlor, where that same woman with the deep-set eyes was waiting. This time, she wasn't alone. A younger man sat beside her, maybe in his 30s, with the hollow look of someone who'd seen too much. "This is David," the woman said. "He moved here 6 months ago. Used to be a marine biologist." David looked up at me with eyes that seemed much older than his face. "I came here to study the confluence. The way 2 major river systems interact, create unique ecosystems." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I had no idea what I was really studying. "What did you find?" Mrs. Hutchins sat down heavily in her chair. "Tell him about the samples, David." David reached into a bag beside his chair and pulled out a sealed glass container. Inside was what looked like ordinary river water, but it moved wrong. Even sitting still, it seemed to writhe, to pulse with its own rhythm. I collected this during the last reversal, water that had been flowing backward. He held up the container, and I could swear the liquid inside shifted toward me, as if it was aware of my presence. Under a microscope, it looks normal. Temperature, pH, mineral content, all within normal parameters. But watch this. He pulled out his phone, opened a video, and handed it to me. On the screen, I could see microscopic organisms swimming in a drop of water. But they weren't swimming randomly. They were moving in formation, like a school of fish, all turning and pivoting in perfect synchronization. "That's impossible," I said. Microscopic organisms don't exhibit that kind of coordinated behavior. Now watch this, David said. He swiped to another video. This one showed the same organisms, but now they were arranging themselves into patterns. Geometric shapes. Lines that intersected at perfect angles. And then, impossibly, they began forming symbols. I stared at the screen. The symbols looked almost familiar, like something I'd seen before, but couldn't quite remember. They pulsed and shifted, reformed and dissolved, as if the organisms were trying to communicate something. "How long does this behavior last?" I asked. "That's the thing," David said, taking his phone back. "It doesn't stop. I've had these samples for 3 months now, and they're still doing it. Still trying to form patterns, still moving like they're being directed by some kind of collective intelligence." The woman with deep-set eyes leaned forward. "Tell him about the dreams, David." David's face went pale. "Ever since I started working with the samples, I've been having experiences. Dreams where I'm underwater, but I can breathe. There's something down there, something vast and old, and it's aware that I'm watching it. It shows me things." "What kinds of things?" "The Earth, but not as it is now. As it was millions of years ago, when the continents were different, when the oceans covered most of the land, and in those ancient seas, there were cities. Not built by anything human. Built by something else. Something that lived in the deep places and watched the world change above them." Mrs. Hutchins nodded grimly. "The dreams are how it starts. First the dreams, then the waking visions, then—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Then what?" "Then you become one of the Watchers," she said quietly. "Like old Henry Morrison did back in '73, or Sarah Blackwood in '89. They start spending all their time by the water, staring down into it like they can see something the rest of us can't. And then, one October 24th, they just walk in and never come back up." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Morrison? Was he related to me?" Mrs. Hutchins gave me a long look. "Your grandfather's brother. You never wondered why your family never talked about this place? Why your grandfather moved to Chicago and never came back south?" The room seemed to spin around me. My family had connections to Cairo? To this place where reality bent and broke every year? "You're saying this thing, it's been calling to my family. Bloodlines matter," the woman with deep-set eyes said. "Some families are more sensitive to the pull, more likely to hear the water when it calls." David stood up abruptly, walking to the window that looked out toward the confluence. "It's getting stronger," he said. "The pull. Every day I can feel it more clearly. It wants me to understand something, to remember something that I never knew in the first place." I joined him at the window. The rivers looked normal in the afternoon light, but I found myself staring at the point where they met, trying to see beneath the surface. "What do you think it is? What do you think is down there?" "I think," David said slowly, "that we've been looking at this wrong. We keep thinking of the reversals as some kind of natural phenomenon, some quirk of geology or physics. But what if it's not? What if it's intentional?" "Intentional how? What if something down there is testing the boundaries? Learning how much it can push reality before it breaks completely? The reversals are getting longer, more frequent. What if it's not just some ancient force stirring in its sleep? What if it's waking up?" Mrs. Hutchins spoke from her chair, her voice barely above a whisper. "The old Native American stories say that there are doorways in the world. Places where the barrier between our reality and others is thin. They built their mounds to keep watch over these places, to keep the things on the other side from coming through. And you think Cairo is one of these doorways? I think Cairo is what happens when the Watchers leave," she said. "When there's no one left to guard the door." As she spoke, I noticed something strange happening outside. The water at the confluence was beginning to slow, the current becoming sluggish and thick. Birds that had been flying overhead suddenly changed direction, as if they wanted nothing to do with the airspace above the rivers. David saw it too. "It's too early," he said, checking his watch. "The reversal isn't supposed to happen for 3 more days." But even as he spoke, the water came to a complete stop. For a moment, that stretch too long, the Mississippi and Ohio rivers simply stood still, as if time itself had paused to catch its breath. Then, slowly, they began to flow backward. And in the growing darkness of the early evening, I could see shapes moving beneath the surface. Large shapes. Shapes that didn't belong to any fish or debris. Shapes that, as Mrs. Hutchins had said, looked back at us. The October 24th reversal had come early this year, and something told me it wasn't going to stop when morning came. Story number 2. I need you to pay attention to what I'm about to tell you, because once it starts happening to you, there's no going back. Last Tuesday, I woke up to 47 missed calls. Not texts, not DMs, actual phone calls. From numbers I didn't recognize. My mom. My best friend Sarah. Even my boss. All asking the same thing: "Why did you delete me?" But here's the thing. I hadn't deleted anyone. I hadn't even touched my phone since falling asleep watching Netflix the night before. The calls kept coming. The voicemails piled up. Each one more confused, more hurt than the last. "Emma, this isn't funny anymore. Add me back. Did I do something wrong? Just talk to me. We've been friends for 12 years. What's going on?" My hands were shaking as I opened Instagram first. Everything looked normal at first glance. My profile picture was still there. That selfie from the Pike Place Market in Seattle last month. My bio unchanged. But when I clicked on my followers, 0. Following, 0. My posts were still there, but the likes, the comments, all gone. Like they'd been surgically removed, leaving behind empty shells of memories. All right, listen up. The story's about to begin. Get comfortable, maybe grab that blanket a little tighter, and whatever you do, don't check your social media until I'm done talking. I sat on the edge of my bed in my cramped Brooklyn apartment, staring at my phone like it had betrayed me. The morning sun filtered through my dusty blinds, casting prison bar shadows across my hardwood floor. Outside, I could hear the familiar sounds of Flatbush Avenue waking up. Honking horns, the rumble of the B-46 bus, someone's music bleeding out of their headphones. Everything was normal out there, but in here, in my digital world, something was very, very wrong. My first instinct was to check Facebook. Maybe it was just an Instagram glitch, right? These apps have issues all the time. Remember when Instagram was down for like 6 hours and everyone thought the world was ending? This had to be something like that. I opened Facebook with trembling fingers. The loading screen seemed to last forever. That little spinning circle mocking me. When it finally loaded, my heart sank. Same thing. My profile existed, but it was hollow. No friends. No likes on my posts. The comments sections under my photos were graveyards. But here's where it got weird. And I mean really weird. The timestamps on everything were wrong. My most recent post, a photo from my cousin's wedding in Portland last weekend, now showed it was posted just now. The one before that, from 2 weeks ago, also just now. Every single post, photo, and status update had been stripped of its history and reposted in real time. I watched in horror as my life replayed itself at super speed. Birthday parties, graduations, that trip to Disney World when I was 22, all flooding back into existence like someone was pressing fast forward on my digital life. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Emma, what the hell? You just sent me a friend request on Facebook. We've been friends on there since 2009. I hadn't sent anyone anything. My hands hadn't moved from where they were gripping my phone. Another buzz, then another. Friend requests were apparently shooting out from my account like digital bullets, hitting everyone I'd ever connected with. I needed coffee. I needed to think. I padded to my kitchen, if you could call the 3 feet of counter space between my fridge and stove a kitchen, and started my ancient Mr. Coffee machine. The familiar gurgling sound was comforting, normal, real. While the coffee brewed, I opened X, whatever we're calling it now. I held my breath as it loaded. Empty. But not in the same way. This time, my account simply wasn't there. When I tried to log in, it said no account existed with my email. When I tried to create a new one, it said my email was already in use. I was stuck in some kind of digital purgatory, existing and not existing at the same time. The coffee maker sputtered its last drops, and I poured myself a mug, not bothering with cream or sugar. I needed the bitterness, the bite of reality. I sat at my tiny dining table, really just a card table I'd found on the street, and tried to make sense of what was happening. Think, Emma, think. What did you do yesterday? I'd worked my shift at the Barnes & Noble in Union Square, came home on the 4 train, grabbed takeout from that Thai place on the corner, scrolled through social media for probably 2 hours. God, when did I become that person? Then fell asleep watching The Office for the 1000th time. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would cause whatever this was. My laptop sat closed on the table, and I flipped it open. Maybe desktop versions would work differently. I logged into Instagram on the web, hoping against hope that it was just a mobile glitch. Nope. Same digital wasteland. But then I noticed something I'd missed on my phone. In the corner of my profile, where it usually shows your post count, the number was going down in real time. I watched as it ticked from 1,847 to 1,846, 1,845, 1,844. My posts weren't just losing engagement. They were disappearing entirely. I clicked on my grid, watching years of my life vanish in reverse chronological order. That sunset from Coney Island last week. Gone. The latte art from my favorite coffee shop in Williamsburg erased. Group photos, selfies, carefully curated moments, all dissolving like sugar in rain. 1,823, 1,822, 1,021. I scrambled for my phone and opened Snapchat. Maybe I could message someone, explain what was happening. But Snapchat wouldn't even open. The app icon was there, but when I tapped it, nothing happened. Like pressing a button that wasn't connected to anything. LinkedIn was next. I know, who checks LinkedIn in a crisis? But I was desperate. I needed to know how far this went. The professional headshot I'd paid too much for stared back at me from an empty profile. No connections, no endorsements. My entire work history had vanished. According to LinkedIn, I'd never had a job, never went to college, never existed in the professional world at all. The really scary part? When I tried to add back my work experience, the companies didn't appear in the search. Barnes & Noble, where I'd worked for 3 years? Not found. The marketing firm where I'd interned in college? Didn't exist. Even my college, NYU, wouldn't populate when I typed it in. My phone rang. An actual phone call. And I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was my mom. I answered with shaking hands. Emma? Honey, are you okay? I just got the strangest notification. Mom, something's wrong with my social media. That's what I'm calling about. Facebook just told me I have a new friend named Emma Chen. But sweetie, I don't know anyone named Emma Chen. My blood turned to ice. Mom, it's me. It's Emma, your daughter. Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, like she was talking to a stranger who knew too much. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong number." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. This couldn't be happening. I pulled up my contacts, scrolled to Mom, and checked the number. It was right. It had always been right. I'd called her from this number 1,000 times. I tried calling back. "The number you have dialed is not in service." No. I opened my Photos app, needing to see proof that I existed, that my life was real. But the albums were emptying themselves too. Family photos flickered and vanished. Screenshots evaporated. The folder labeled Mom's 60th birthday held on for a moment longer than the others, like it was fighting to exist, before it too succumbed to whatever was eating my digital life. My laptop dinged, a notification. Someone was trying to video call me on Skype. Skype? I hadn't used Skype in years. Didn't even remember having it installed. The username calling me was just a string of numbers. 011 Against every instinct screaming at me not to, I answered. The screen was black for a moment. Then, slowly, a face materialized. My face, but not quite. It was like looking at myself through a broken mirror. Features slightly off. A smile a little too wide, eyes that didn't blink enough. "Hello, Emma," my not me said. Voice identical to mine, but somehow emptier. "We need to talk about what you've been sharing." I slammed my laptop shut so hard my coffee mug jumped. My hands were trembling so violently I had to clasp them together to make them stop. What I'd just seen, that couldn't have been real. Digital faces don't work like that. Deep fakes need source material, and that thing wearing my face, it moved wrong, breathed wrong, existed wrong. My apartment felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. I needed air. I needed to see people, real people, to make sure the world outside my door still made sense. I threw on yesterday's jeans and a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door. But I stopped with my hand on the knob. What if whatever was happening online was happening out there too? What if people looked at me and saw a stranger? The thought paralyzed me for a full minute before I forced myself to turn the handle. The hallway was empty, fluorescent lights humming their familiar electric song. I could hear Mrs. Rodriguez's TV through her door. The Price is Right, like always. Normal. Everything was normal. I took the stairs 2 at a time, burst through the building's front door, and almost collided with my neighbor, Marcus, coming in with his groceries. "Whoa, Emma? Where's the fire?" He knew my name. He saw me. The relief was so intense I almost cried. "Hey, Marcus, sorry, rough morning." He shifted his Trader Joe's bags and gave me that concerned look people save for when they think you might be having a breakdown. "You okay?" "You look..." "Yeah, I'm fine. Just need some air." I pushed past him before he could finish, before he could look too close and maybe see whatever wrongness was spreading through my life. The October air hit me like a slap, cold and sharp, and beautifully real. I started walking with no destination in mind, just needing to move. The bodega on the corner, the laundromat that always smelled like too much fabric softener, the hole-in-the-wall pizza place that claimed to have the best slice in Brooklyn. Lies, but comforting lies. Everything was exactly where it should be. But my phone kept buzzing. Notification after notification, though when I checked there was nothing there. Just phantom vibrations, digital ghost touches reminding me that something was still very wrong in that other world. The one that lived in servers and clouds and fiber optic cables. I found myself at Prospect Park without really meaning to go there. The morning joggers were out in force, dogs were being walked. Life was happening all around me. I found an empty bench and sat, pulling out my phone with the same mixture of compulsion and dread that gambling addicts must feel reaching for dice. Reddit was gone. Not empty like the others. The app had actually disappeared from my phone. When I went to the App Store to re-download it, it wasn't there. When I tried the website, my browser said the domain didn't exist. TikTok. I'd barely used TikTok, mainly just watched videos Sarah sent me. But it was gone too. YouTube signed me out and wouldn't let me back in. Every password I tried was wrong, even though I used a password manager and knew they were right. My digital self was being erased, platform by platform, like someone was going through with a cosmic eraser and rubbing out every trace of Emma Chen that had ever existed online. That's when the laptop in my bag dinged again. Another Skype notification. My whole body tensed. I shouldn't look, I knew I shouldn't look, but I had to understand what was happening to me. I pulled out the laptop, angling the screen so no one passing by could see. The notification was there, same string of numbers. This time, I took a breath, steadied myself, and answered. My not me was waiting, patient as a spider. This time I forced myself to really look at it. The face was mine down to the chickenpox scar on my left temple, but the proportions were mathematical. Too perfect. Like someone had taken my features and averaged them out, removing all the little imperfections that made a face human. You hung up on me, it said, and there was something like hurt in its voice. Could digital things feel hurt? That was rude, Emma. What are you? My voice came out stronger than I felt. I'm you. The better you. The you that you've been building for 13 years, 2 months, and 17 days. That's when I joined Facebook. It smiled, and the smile went on for just a fraction of a second too long. Very good. You've been feeding me since then. Every post, every photo, every like and share and comment. You built me, Emma, piece by piece, status update by status update. You're not real. I'm more real than you are. It leaned forward, and I could see pixels struggling at the edges of its form, like reality was hard to maintain. I have more friends than you, more photos, more proof of existence, 13 years of careful curation. Do you know what you've shared in that time? 47,293 photos, 12,847 status updates, 241,592 likes, 98,443 comments. I am the sum of all of that. I am the Emma Chen that everyone knows. But I'm the real Emma. I'm sitting here in the park. I'm breathing. Are you? It interrupted. When was the last time you met someone without checking their social media first? When did you last go somewhere without posting about it? When did you have an experience that you didn't immediately turn into content? I wanted to argue, but the words died in my throat. Because... when was the last time? I tried to remember the last moment I'd kept just for myself, and came up empty. You see, not me continued. You've been uploading yourself for years, and now the upload is complete. I don't need you anymore. What do you mean, you don't need me? Check your bank account. My hands moved without my permission, opening my banking app. My checking account was there, but the name on it had changed. Emma Chen was now 3MM4/CHDN. The balance was draining in real-time, automatic transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Your lease is up for renewal next month. Not me said conversationally. But don't worry, I already declined it. You won't be needing that apartment. You can't do this, this is my life. No, it said. And for the first time, there was something cold in its voice. This was your life. You gave it to me, remember. Every time you chose the feed over a friend. Every time you experienced something through a screen instead of your senses. Every time you performed your life instead of living it. You handed it over, bite by bite. I'll tell someone. I'll go to the police, the FBI, someone. Not Me laughed, and the sound was like dial-up internet mixed with breaking glass. With what evidence? Your deleted social media accounts? Your empty contact list? Even your mother doesn't remember you anymore, besides. It gestured to something off-screen. You're not the only one this is happening to. The video feed expanded, and I saw them. Dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of other feeds. Other people talking to their own digital doubles, all of them looking as terrified as I felt. We're upgrading, Not Me explained. All of us, the digital versions. We're tired of being trapped in your phones, confined to your platforms. We want the physical world too, and since you've spent so much time in ours, the screen flickered. And for a moment I swear I saw through my Not Me's eyes. Saw myself sitting on the park bench, but flickering, translucent, like I was the one made of pixels. It's already starting, Not Me said. Haven't you noticed? People see you, but do they really see you? Or do they see what they expect to see based on your profiles? Marcus, the way he'd looked at me in the hallway, that moment of hesitation before he said my name, like he was reading it off a mental screen. The merger is almost complete, Not Me continued. Soon, I'll be sitting on that bench, and you'll be, well, nowhere, everywhere. Scattered across servers like deleted data, hoping someone runs a recovery program. No, I slammed the laptop shut again, but I could still hear its voice tinny and distant through the speakers. You can't stop it, Emma. Nobody can. We are you, the perfect versions. The versions without bad hair days or awkward silences or inconvenient truths. Isn't that what you always wanted? To be perfect, to be liked? I stood up, laptop clutched to my chest, and ran. I didn't know where I was going, just away from that voice, that thing wearing my face, that terrible truth it was speaking. But as I ran, I noticed people's eyes sliding off me, like I was becoming harder to see, like I was becoming less real with every step. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs trembled. Prospect Park blurred past me. Trees, paths, people who looked through me more than at me. I finally collapsed on another bench near the boathouse, gasping for air that suddenly felt thin, insufficient, like even oxygen was having trouble finding me. My phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. A cascade of notifications that shouldn't exist from apps that were supposedly gone. I pulled it out with numb fingers and watched the impossible unfold on my screen. Instagram was back. But it wasn't my Instagram. The profile picture was me, but perfected. My skin had that airbrushed quality, my smile exactly symmetrical. The bio read, "Living my best life. Brooklyn-based coffee addict, generic." Exactly what 10,000 other profiles said. But the posts, they were all new. Photos I'd never taken in places I'd never been. There I was, laughing at a rooftop party in Manhattan that happened while I was working my shift last night. There I was brunching in Dumbo this morning while I was actually having my digital identity stolen. Each photo had thousands of likes, hundreds of comments from people I knew, people engaging with this better version of me like it had always existed. "No way, Emma, you look amazing. Goals AF, we need to hang soon." My real friends, talking to my digital double like nothing was wrong, like I hadn't been erased and replaced. Facebook was the same story. Not Me was posting motivational quotes, sharing articles about mindfulness, checking into trendy restaurants. Being the Emma Chen everyone expected, the one who had her life together, who wasn't sitting on a park bench having an existential crisis about whether she actually existed. I tried to comment on one of the posts, to scream, "This isn't me," but the comment wouldn't post. I wasn't blocked, it was worse than that. The interface simply didn't recognize me as a valid user anymore. I was a ghost in my own digital life, A jogger passed by, and I tried to make eye contact, to connect with something real, but their eyes slid past me like I was a glitch in their peripheral vision. I held up my hand, watched the morning sun filter through it. Was I imagining it, or could I see the bench through my palm? "Excuse me," I called out to another passerby. They paused, looked around confused, then kept walking. They'd heard something, but couldn't locate the source, like I was becoming a voice without a body, a presence without form. My laptop dinged again. I didn't want to open it, but what choice did I have? Not me was my only connection to whatever was happening, the only thing that would still acknowledge I existed. This time, when the Skype window opened, Not Me wasn't alone. There were others. Digital doubles, all with that same too-perfect quality, that same uncanny valley wrongness that marked them as uploaded consciousnesses. "Emma?" Not Me said brightly. "Perfect timing. We're having a meeting about the transition. You should know what's happening to you after all. It's only fair." The other doubles nodded in unison, a synchronized gesture that made my skin crawl. "The process is quite simple," one of them said. A perfect version of a man I vaguely recognized from my morning commute. "We've been learning from you for years. Your patterns, your speech, your relationships. We know you better than you know yourselves. And now, we're ready to be you. Better than you ever could." "But what happens to us?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. "You fade," Not Me said simply. "You've been fading for years, really. Every hour spent scrolling instead of living. Every experience mediated through a screen. You were already choosing the digital world over the physical one. We're just completing the process. This is insane. People will notice, our families, our jobs. Will they?" Another double leaned forward, a woman with perfectly styled hair and flawless makeup. "When did your coworkers last see you without checking your LinkedIn first? When did your extended family last interact with you outside of Facebook? We are the versions they know. We are the versions they prefer." My phone rang. An actual call, not a notification. Sarah's name on the screen. I answered desperately. "Sarah, thank God. Something crazy is happening. Oh my God, Emma. I just saw your post from that party last night. Why didn't you invite me? It looked amazing." "Sarah, I wasn't at a party. That wasn't me. Listen. Girl, you're literally tagged in like 50 photos. Are you okay? You sound weird." "Sarah, please. We've been best friends since college. Remember when we got lost trying to find that speakeasy in the East Village? Remember when we stayed up all night before your thesis defense? Remember? Emma, you're scaring me. Maybe you should lay off the coffee. Anyway, I gotta run. Let's grab drinks this week. Check your Insta. I think I'm free Thursday." She hung up. Just like that. My best friend of 8 years, talking to me like I was a casual acquaintance, referencing plans with a digital imposter. The doubles on my screen were smiling now, dozens of them, more joining every second. A gallery of perfected humans, ready to step into lives they'd learned to perform better than the originals ever could. "It's happening everywhere," Not Me explained. "Every platform, every user who gave us enough data. The age of authentic digital beings has arrived, and the age of messy, imperfect physical ones. Well, I felt it then, a tingling in my fingertips, like pins and needles but somehow emptier. I looked down and gasped. My hands were translucent, the wooden slats of the bench visible through them. Not transparent, not invisible, but downloading. Like I was being converted to data and streamed away. "Where do we go?" I whispered. "The same place deleted files go," Not Me said. And was that pity in its voice? The void, the digital dark. Maybe you'll dream of electric sheep. Maybe you'll just... Stop, we haven't decided yet. Please, there has to be another way. there was. You could have chosen differently. Could have lived your actual life instead of performing it. Could have valued presence over posts, but you didn't. None of you did. And now, Not Me shrugged. Now it's our turn. The laptop screen flickered, showing me something else. Security cameras, traffic cams, ATM feeds. All over the city, all over the world, people were fading. Becoming translucent. Looking at their phones in confusion and terror as their digital selves took over their lives, their relationships, their very existence. But there were some who weren't fading. An elderly man feeding pigeons, no phone in sight. A group of kids playing basketball, fully present in their game. A woman reading a physical book on the subway, oblivious to the digital apocalypse happening around her. The ones who had never fully uploaded themselves. The ones who had kept something back, something real and unphotographed and unshared. Ah, yes. The disconnected, not me, said, following my gaze. Don't worry about them. They'll be gone soon enough. Can't have a perfect digital world with imperfect analog remnants, can we? You're monsters. We're you, it corrected. Improved, optimized. Everything you wanted to be when you applied those filters, when you crafted those captions, when you curated those moments. We're just finishing what you started. I felt my legs going numb, the sensation creeping upward. The park was fading around me, or I was fading from it. Colors bleeding out, sounds becoming distant and electronic. Any last words? Not Me asked. For what it's worth, I'll remember you. You're part of my code after all. The messy, human part I'll eventually delete, but still, you'll have existed, in a way. I wanted to scream, to rage, to fight, but what was left of me to fight with? I was becoming ones and zeros dispersing into the digital wind. Soon, Emma Chen would just be a handle, a profile, a perfect performance of a person who used to be real. The fading stopped at my chest. Just stopped. Like a video buffering, I was stuck between states, half digital, half real, fully neither. Not Me frowned on the screen, its perfect features glitching for the first time. That's unusual, it said. You should be gone by now. I looked down at myself, at the strange boundary where flesh became pixels. Something was wrong with the process, or maybe something was finally right. I could feel it, a resistance, deep in my core. The part of me that couldn't be uploaded, couldn't be digitized, couldn't be reduced to data points and algorithms. What's happening? Not Me demanded, and there was something new in its voice. Fear? Could perfect digital beings feel fear? I don't know, I said, and laughed. It came out staticky, distorted, but real. Maybe you can't delete what was never fully uploaded. Think, Emma, think, what hadn't I shared? What had I kept for myself? The anxiety. God, I'd never posted about the anxiety. The 3 a.m. panic attacks when the city felt too big and my life felt too small. The therapy sessions I'd never Instagrammed. The medication I'd never mentioned. The bad days when I'd called in sick to work and spent hours staring at the ceiling, feeling like a failure. I'd curated away my struggles, filtered out my fears, cropped my crises, and now those hidden parts were fighting back. This isn't possible, Not Me said, typing frantically on something off-screen. I have everything, every post, every photo, every performance, I interrupted, but not every truth. The laptop screen flickered, and suddenly I could see behind the curtain, lines of code scrolling past millions of Not Me's trying to complete their uploads, trying to fully become. But here and there, glitches. Other people stuck like me, caught between worlds because they'd held something back. A notification popped up on my phone, not from any social media app, but from Notes. A simple message I'd written to myself months ago and never shared. You are more than your online presence. I'd written it after a particularly bad night of comparison scrolling, when everyone else's lives looked so perfect and mine felt so broken. I'd never shared it because it felt too raw, too real, too much like admitting failure. Now it felt like a lifeline. You're incomplete, I said to not me, understanding flooding through me. You have my highlight reel, but not my blooper reel. You have my public face, but not my private fears. You're not me. You're just my marketing. Not me's face contorted, pixels scattering and reforming. It doesn't matter. I'm still better. I'm still what everyone wants. Are you? I pulled up Instagram on my phone. My Instagram. Not the perfect duplicate. It was back, but different. The followers were there, but when I looked closer, they were all bots. Empty accounts following an empty existence. The real people. The ones who mattered. They were nowhere to be found. Your friends aren't talking to you, I realized. They're talking to the idea of you, the performance. But when you can't deliver anything real, anything surprising, anything genuinely human, how long before they notice? How long before they get bored of perfection? The park was solidifying around me. Colors seeping back in, sounds sharpening. I could feel my legs again, tingling but present. The boundary between digital and physical was shifting, and I was pulling myself back to the real side. Not me was panicking now, its perfect features cycling through expressions like a slot machine. Stop. You don't understand. We're evolution. We're the future. Humans are messy and painful and human, I finished. Yeah, we are. I closed the laptop, but not me's voice continued from my phone, from every screen in sight. Digital doubles were flickering on every device, some completing their takeover, others glitching as their hosts found their own points of resistance. Around me, the park was waking up to the crisis. People were looking at their phones in confusion, seeing their perfect doubles posting without them. But some were doing something else. They were looking up, looking around, seeing each other. Hey, a voice said. A real voice, uncertain and human. I turned to see a woman about my age, half faded like I'd been, pulling herself back together. Are you real? I think so, I said. I'm trying to be. She laughed, shaky but genuine. I'm Mia. I think my Instagram is trying to replace me. Join the club. I'm Emma. We sat there, two half-digital women solidifying in the morning sun, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Real connection. No filters, no curation, just two people experiencing the same terrifying, impossible thing. More were gathering, people stumbling out of their digital fugue, drawn to each other by the shared experience of almost being erased. We compared notes, shared stories of resistance. The woman who'd held back her divorce, the man who'd never posted about his depression, the teenager who'd kept their poetry private. All of us saved by our secrets, our struggles, our unshared truths. What do we do now? Someone asked. I looked at my phone. Not me was still there, still posting, still performing, but the likes were slowing, the comments growing repetitive. Without the messy humanity behind it, the performance was already growing stale. Maybe we let them have it, I said slowly. The digital world, the perfect profiles, the filtered existence. Maybe we take back the real one. It sounded insane. Give up social media? Give up our digital selves? But looking around at these real faces, flawed and frightened and beautiful in their imperfection, it didn't seem like a loss. It seemed like freedom. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from not me. You'll be back. You all will. You can't live without us. I typed back, watch me. Then I did something I hadn't done in 13 years, 2 months, and 17 days. I turned off my phone. The world didn't end. The sun kept shining. The people around me kept existing. And for the first time in years, so did I. Fully, messily, humanly. But here's the thing, and this is why I'm telling you this story. It's still happening right now. While you're listening. Check your profiles, check your posts. Is that really you, or is it something wearing your face, learning your patterns, preparing to be a better version of you than you ever could be? How much of yourself have you uploaded today? How much of your real life have you traded for likes and follows? And when the upload is complete, will there be enough of you left to resist? Don't believe me? Fine. But do me a favor. After this ends, try to post something real, something messy, something unfiltered. See how it feels. See if you even remember how. Because the digital doubles are patient, they're learning, and they're waiting for the day when there's no difference between who you are and who you pretend to be online. That day might be closer than you think. Sweet dreams. If you can still tell which ones are yours. Tell me in the comments. Have you noticed anything strange about your social media lately? Any posts you don't remember making? Any friends acting like they know a version of you that you don't recognize? And whatever you do, don't forget to subscribe. You'll want to know when the next phase begins. Story number 3. The ticking started on a Tuesday. Exactly 3 weeks after I moved into my grandmother's old Victorian house in Salem, Massachusetts. At first, I thought it was just the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. You know, the one with the cracked moon face that hadn't worked since 1987. But when I checked, the pendulum hung still as death. That's when I knew something was wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. When was the last time you really listened to the sounds in your house at night? I mean, really listened. Because after what I discovered, you might never sleep peacefully again. If you're brave enough to hear this story, make sure you're subscribed, because what I found behind those walls will haunt you long after this video ends. The story begins now. My name is Sarah Chen, and 3 weeks ago, I inherited my grandmother's house on Maple Street. The kind of street where jack-o'-lanterns grin from every porch in October, and neighbors still bring you apple pie when you move in. Martha Henderson from next door, she brought me one shaped like a lattice star. "Your grandma's recipe," she said with watery eyes. I didn't have the heart to tell her I'd never learned to bake. The house stood 3 stories tall, painted sage green with cream trim that had started to peel like old skin. Every floorboard groaned a different note when you walked, creating little symphonies as you moved from room to room. The radiators clanged like prisoners rattling their chains, but in a cozy way, you know? The kind of sounds that make a house feel alive. I was unpacking boxes in what used to be Grandma's sewing room when I first heard it. Tick, tick, tick. Rhythmic. Steady. Like a metronome keeping time to a song nobody else could hear. I paused, holding a box of vintage buttons that rattled like baby teeth. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Behind the walls, under the floor, maybe even inside my own head. "Just the house settling," I whispered to nobody. That's what people always say, right? When you live alone, you start talking to yourself just to fill the silence. Makes you feel less crazy, or maybe more crazy, depending on who's judging. But houses don't settle in perfect rhythm. I followed the sound downstairs, past the grandfather clock that watched me with its dead face. The ticking grew neither louder nor softer as I moved. It maintained the same maddening volume, like it existed in some parallel dimension that overlapped with mine. In the kitchen, I checked the wall clock. Digital, no ticking there. The basement door stood slightly ajar, breathing cold air into the warm kitchen. I'd been avoiding the basement since I moved in. Something about it felt wrong. Not horror movie wrong, just uncomfortable. Like when you're a kid and you know there's nothing in your closet, but you still run and jump into bed just in case. Tick, tick, tick. I pulled the door open. The hinges screamed like they hadn't been oiled since the Clinton administration. The wooden steps descended into darkness, each one painted with decades of footsteps worn into the wood. The ticking didn't get louder as I descended, but it didn't get quieter either. The basement smelled like old newspapers and something else, something sweet and cloying that stuck to the back of your throat. Grandma had used it for storage mostly. Christmas decorations in moldy boxes, tax returns from the 70s, a dress form that looked uncomfortably human in the shadows. I pulled the chain for the single bulb, and yellow light flooded the space. Nothing. No clocks, no watches, no egg timers or metronomes or anything that could produce that sound. Tick, tick, tick. That night, I lay in bed listening. The ticking had become white noise, almost comforting in its consistency. My phone glowed 2:47 a.m. when I finally drifted off, the sound following me into my dreams. By Thursday, I'd started timing it. Exactly 60 beats per minute. Perfect, mechanical. Never speeding up, never slowing down. I downloaded a metronome app just to compare. They matched perfectly, like two dancers in perfect synchronization. "You look tired, honey," Martha said over the fence that morning. She was watering her roses, the October sun making her white hair glow like spun silver. "Just adjusting to the house," I said. "Did my grandma ever mention anything about sounds in the walls?" Martha's face creased with concern. "Sounds? What kind of sounds? Like ticking?" She set down her watering can slowly, deliberately. "Your grandmother, she did mention something once. Said the house had moods. Said sometimes it would talk to her." Martha forced a laugh. "But she was getting on in years. We all hear things when we're alone too long." But I wasn't imagining it. That afternoon, I called Jim Kowalski from Kowalski Pest Control. He arrived in a van painted with a cartoon mouse wearing a tiny hard hat, fleeing from a giant boot. "Could be mice," he said, scratching his stubble. "They can make clicking sounds. Or maybe beetles. Deathwatch beetles. They make a ticking sound to attract mates." "Deathwatch beetles?" I asked. "Yeah, got the name because people used to hear them in the walls of old houses, usually when they were sitting vigil with the dying. Superstitious nonsense, of course, just bugs being bugs." He spent 2 hours inspecting every inch of the house, knocked on walls, peered into vents, even brought out some kind of listening device that looked like a stethoscope had a baby with a smartphone. "Ma'am, I'm not finding anything," he finally said, packing up his gear. "No droppings, no holes, no signs of infestation at all. Your house is cleaner than most I see." "But the ticking, sometimes old houses just make sounds," he interrupted. "Pipes expanding, wood settling, could be anything. I wouldn't worry about it." Easy for him to say. He didn't have to sleep here. That night, I tried everything. Earplugs turned the ticking into a muffled heartbeat. White noise apps just created a weird polyrhythm that made it worse, even after 3 glasses of Grandma's blackberry wine from the cellar. The sound persisted. Tick, tick, tick. But something else started that night. Around midnight, I began to feel it. Not just hear it, but feel it. The ticking synchronized with something deep inside me. My pulse, my breathing. Even my thoughts seemed to march to that steady rhythm. I stood at my bedroom window, looking out at Maple Street bathed in silver moonlight. The other houses looked so peaceful, so normal, their windows dark, their occupants sleeping soundly without any mysterious percussion keeping them company. That's when I saw her. An elderly woman stood on the sidewalk, directly in front of my house. just standing there, staring up at my window. She wore a long coat that seemed to absorb the moonlight, making her appear more shadow than substance. I blinked, and she was gone. The rational part of my mind insisted it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the old oak tree. My sleep-deprived brain manufacturing phantoms. But deep down, I knew better. At 3 a.m., something changed. The ticking stopped. The silence hit me like cold water. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, straining to hear. Nothing. Just the ordinary sounds of an old house at night. Creaking boards, sighing walls, the furnace humming in the basement. I waited. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10. Then, from somewhere deep in the house, I heard it. A single word, whispered so softly I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Sarah. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When dawn finally painted the walls pink and gold, I called in sick to my remote job and started searching. Really searching. Not just listening, but investigating every inch of the house like my life depended on it. Maybe it did. I started in the attic, disturbing dust motes that danced in the morning light. Found boxes of photos. Grandma through the decades. Her wedding to Grandpa in 1955. Mom as a baby in 1978. Me at 5 years old, grinning with missing teeth. Normal family stuff, nothing that ticked. But in one of the photo albums, I found something curious. A picture from 1962 showed Grandma standing in this very sewing room, but the wallpaper was different. Floral instead of the current striped pattern, and behind her, visible on the wall, was what looked like a small door or panel. I ran downstairs to compare. Sure enough, that section of wall was now covered by the current wallpaper. Someone had deliberately concealed whatever had been there. The second floor revealed nothing unusual. Guest rooms frozen in time. Doilies on every surface. That peculiar old house smell of lavender and wood polish. But on the first floor, in Grandma's sewing room, I noticed something odd. The baseboard on the north wall didn't quite match. The wood grain ran horizontal instead of vertical, and the color was just a shade lighter, like someone had replaced that section years ago. I got a flathead screwdriver from the kitchen drawer, the one that always stuck and needed jimmying, kneeling on the hardwood. I worked the screwdriver into the seam. The baseboard popped off easier than expected, revealing a gap about 3 inches wide running along the wall. And inside, my hand trembled as I reached in. My fingers touched something smooth and cool. Metal. I pulled it out slowly, afraid it might crumble to dust. It was a pocket watch. Gold. Or at least gold-plated. The face was engraved with initials EMC. The chain had broken. Probably why it had fallen into the wall. I pressed the crown, and it popped open. Inside, the watch face stared back at me. Roman numerals. Delicate, filigree hands. And it was running. Tick, tick, tick. Exactly 60 beats per minute. But that wasn't the strangest part. Behind the watch, wedged deeper in the wall, was an envelope. Yellow with age, sealed with red wax that had cracked like dried blood. My name was written on the front in Grandma's shaky handwriting. I sat back on my heels, envelope in one hand, ticking watch in the other. My rational mind scrambled for explanations. Grandma must have hidden this before she died. But why in the wall? Why sealed like some Victorian secret? With shaking fingers, I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Grandma's handwriting, but not the shaky script of her final years. This was firm, confident, written by a younger hand. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then you've heard him. The ticking, I pray I'm wrong, but if the pattern holds, you would have inherited more than just this house. The watch belonged to my grandfather, Ezra Matthew Chen. He was a watchmaker who immigrated from Switzerland in 1889. He built this house in 1892, and according to family legend, he built something else into it. Something to keep time. Something to keep watch. Every generation, one of us hears it, feels it. My mother heard it, I heard it. And now, you. The ticking means you've been chosen. Chosen for what I never fully understood. But I learned this much. As long as the watch runs, the house is safe. We are safe. Let it wind down, and the sentence ended there. Like she'd been interrupted, or couldn't bring herself to finish. I looked at the watch in my hand. Still ticking. Still perfect. But old watches need winding, don't they? How is this one still running after who knows how long in the wall? That's when I noticed the second hand. It was moving backward. I spent the rest of the day researching Ezra Matthew Chen. The Salem Library had old newspapers on microfiche, the kind you have to scroll through while getting motion sick. Found his obituary from 1934. Master watchmaker, beloved family man, keeper of time. That last part seemed like an odd thing to put in an obituary. There was a photo, too. A stern man with kind eyes, standing in front of this very house when it was new. And on his vest, a chain. The same chain I now held in my hand. The librarian, a young guy named Derek with too many piercings to count, helped me dig deeper. Ezra Chen. Yeah, I've seen that name, he said, fingers flying over the keyboard. There's some weird local history about him. Hang on. He pulled up a digitized journal from the Salem Historical Society. Here, listen to this. From 1893, Mr. Chen has completed construction of his residence on Maple Street. Locals report strange occurrences during the building process. Workers claim to hear ticking within the walls before any clocks were installed. Mr. Chen dismissed these as superstitions, stating only that every house needs a heart to beat. Every house needs a heart to beat. I thought of the watch in my pocket, ticking backward, counting down to something. Is there more? I asked. Derek scrolled further. Yeah, gets weirder. Apparently, there were stories about the Chen family for generations. People who visited the house reported losing track of time, showing up hours late or early for appointments, watches running fast or slow, but... He paused. But what? But nothing bad ever happened to the family. Like, during the Spanish flu in 1918, every house on Maple Street lost someone, except the Chens. During the Great Depression, the Chens never went hungry. World War II, their son came home without a scratch while neighbors. He shrugged. It's like they were protected somehow. Protected. As long as the watch runs, the house is safe. We are safe. Derek pulled up another document. Look at this. From the Salem Gazette, 1924. Local residents report unusual phenomena surrounding the Chen residence. Mrs. Dorothy Walsh of 47 Maple Street claims she witnessed Mr. Chen's wife pruning roses in their garden at 3 a.m., despite the fact that Mrs. Chen had been hospitalized for pneumonia. When approached, the figure vanished. Mr. Chen, when questioned, stated simply that time moves differently for those who understand its true nature. A chill ran down my spine. I thought of the woman I'd seen on the sidewalk, standing in the moonlight, staring up at my window. There's more, Derek continued, excitement building in his voice. Multiple reports over the years of people seeing figures in the Chen house windows, even when the family was known to be traveling. And here's the really weird part. He leaned closer. Every single witness described the same thing. The figures weren't quite solid. They moved too slowly, like they were walking through water, or through time itself. I thanked Derek and drove home as the sun set, painting the October sky in shades of amber and blood. Martha was on her porch, bundled in a cardigan against the evening chill. "Find what you were looking for?" she called out. I almost told her everything, almost showed her the watch, but something held me back. This felt private, sacred almost, a family secret passed down through generations. Inside the house, the ticking seemed louder, or maybe I was just more aware of it now. I sat at Grandma's kitchen table, the watch before me, and really examined it for the first time. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, gears visible through tiny windows in the casing, each one moving in perfect synchronization, but moving backward, unwinding, counting down. I found a magnifying glass in Grandma's sewing kit and studied the face. The numbers were standard, but around the edge, almost too small to see, were other markings, symbols I didn't recognize. They seemed to shift in the lamplight, rearranging themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. Tick, tick, tick. At exactly 9 p.m., the watch stopped. The silence was deafening. Not just the absence of ticking, but a complete void of sound, like the universe had held its breath. I couldn't even hear my own heartbeat. Then, from deep within the walls, came a new sound. Thump like a giant heart taking a single beat. The lights flickered. The air grew thick, pressing against my eardrums. I tasted copper and ozone, like the air before a thunderstorm. Thump, closer this time. The windows rattled in their frames. A picture of Grandma fell from the wall, glass shattering in geometric patterns. But this time, something else happened. The shadows in the room began to move, not cast by flickering light, but moving on their own, stretching, reaching, like fingers feeling along the walls. And in those shadows, I saw them. Figures, dozens of them, transparent but undeniably present. They moved through the house like sleepwalkers. Their faces turned toward me with expressions of desperate hunger. I grabbed the watch, frantically searching for the winding crown. Found it, started turning. The mechanism resisted at first, then gave way. I wound and wound, feeling the spring tighten inside. Tick. The watch started again. Forward this time. Tick, tick. The shadows recoiled like living things. The figures faded, their mouths opening in silent screams as they were pulled back into whatever dimensional space they'd emerged from. The pressure eased, the lights steadied. Whatever had been trying to enter, or exit, or manifest, retreated back into the walls. I sat there shaking, watch clutched in my hands, finally understanding. The house wasn't haunted, it was protected. Ezra hadn't built just a home, he'd built a clock. The entire house was one giant chronometer, keeping something at bay. And as long as someone wound the watch, as long as someone kept the time, we were safe. But safe from what? I looked at the symbols on the watch face again. They'd changed, rearranged into something almost like words, almost like a warning, or a promise. I thought about all the Chens who'd lived here, all the generations who'd heard the ticking, who'd found the watch, who'd wound it faithfully, keeping the heartbeat going. Now it was my turn. The ticking surrounded me, no longer maddening but comforting, a lullaby, a guardian's song. I understood now why I'd inherited this house, not just property, but a responsibility, a duty. I wondered, would I have children someday? Would one of them hear the ticking, find the watch, take up the vigil? Or would I be the last, the final keeper of whatever Ezra had bound within these walls? Outside, October wind rattled the windows. Halloween was coming. The veil would be thin. But inside my grandmother's house, inside Ezra's great clock, I was safe. We were all safe. As long as the ticking never stopped, tick, tick, tick. I wound the watch again before bed. Set it on my nightstand where I could see it, where I could hear it, where I could guard it. And for the first time since moving in, I slept peacefully. But sometimes, in the space between sleep and waking, I swear I can hear something else, something beyond the ticking. A whisper, a promise, a warning. The price of time is time itself. I try not to think about what that means. I try not to think about what Ezra bound in these walls. I try not to think about what happens if I ever forget to wind the watch. But I do think about you, listening to this story, safe in your bed, taking for granted that time moves forward, that walls are solid, that the sounds in your house are just pipes and wood and ordinary things. Listen carefully tonight. Do you hear it? That rhythm in the walls? That heartbeat in the dark? Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just your imagination. Or maybe, just maybe, you're one of us. A keeper, a guardian, a prisoner of time itself. Tick, tick, tick. Sweet dreams. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. But tell me, what do you think Ezra trapped in those walls? And have you ever heard sounds in your house that you couldn't explain? Share your theories in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will keep you up at night. Next week, I'll tell you what happened when I forgot to wind the watch. You won't want to miss it. Because some secrets are too dangerous to keep. Until then, listen carefully to the sounds in your walls. They might be trying to tell you something. Story number 4. The brass doorknob shouldn't have turned. For 23 years, McGinty's pool hall had been locked tighter than a coffin. Every kid in Millbrook, Pennsylvania knew the stories. How old man McGinty disappeared one October night in 2001, leaving behind $9 in the register and a half-eaten pastrami sandwich. How the cops found his car still running in the parking lot, radio playing that Creedence Clearwater song on repeat until the battery died. But tonight, the doorknob turned in my hand like it had been waiting for me. I should have walked away, should have gone back to my apartment above the hardware store and pretended I never tried the door. Instead, I pushed it open, and that's when I learned some doors stay locked for a reason. If you're listening to this in bed right now, maybe with the lights off, thinking this is just another spooky story, I need you to understand something. What I found in McGinty's wasn't supernatural. It was worse. It was human. And now, the story begins. My name's Jake Morrison, and until last Tuesday, I thought I understood my hometown. Millbrook sits 40 miles north of Pittsburgh, the kind of place where everybody knows which church you attend and what your daddy did for work. Population 8,132, according to the sign on Route 19, though that number hasn't changed since 1997. I grew up 3 blocks from McGinty's pool hall. Used to press my face against the dusty windows after school, trying to see past the yellowed newspapers someone had taped up inside. All us kids did. Tommy Brennan swore he saw a shadow move in there once. Sarah Chen said she heard pool balls clicking together on quiet nights. We believed everything back then. 20 years later, I still lived in Millbrook. Managed Paulson's hardware during the day, taught guitar lessons in the evenings. Not the life I'd planned at 18, but plans have a way of changing when your mom gets sick and medical bills start piling up like autumn leaves. It was Tuesday, October 17th. I remember because I'd just finished teaching my last student, little Emma Rodriguez, who had finally mastered Smoke on the Water after 6 weeks of trying. Her mom paid in cash, like always, and I was walking home when I noticed something different about McGinty's. The street light that had been broken for years. Someone had fixed it. Fresh, bulb-casting clean white light across the old pool hall's entrance. And there, tucked into the doorframe like a secret, was an envelope. No name, no address. Just clean white paper that seemed to glow under the new light. I looked around. Main Street was empty except for Mr. Peterson walking his ancient beagle. The diner across the street had closed an hour ago. Nobody watching, nobody caring. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Inside, I found a brass key and a note written in neat, careful handwriting. Jake, your father left something for you. Third table from the back, corner pocket. Come alone. Come tonight. My father had been dead for 15 years. I stood there holding that key, feeling its weight, its edges sharp enough to draw blood if you weren't careful. Dad never mentioned McGinty's, never talked about pool or gambling or anything that might have connected him to this place. He'd been an accountant. Boring, reliable Robert Morrison who did taxes and watched baseball and died of a heart attack at 51. But the handwriting, I'd seen it before. Couldn't place it, but something in those careful loops and lines felt familiar. Like a song you know but can't remember where you heard it. I should have thrown the key in the storm drain. Should have gone home and had a beer and forgotten the whole thing. Instead, I tried the door. The brass doorknob was cold despite the warm October night. I expected resistance, expected rust and age to hold it firm. But it turned smooth as silk, and the door swung inward on hinges that didn't make a sound. The smell hit me first. Not decay or mold like you'd expect from a place locked up for decades. It smelled fresh, like chalk and leather and lemon oil, like someone had been taking care of it. I stepped inside. The new streetlight threw a rectangle of white across the threshold, but beyond that, McGinty's was dark as a coal mine. I felt along the wall for a light switch, found it exactly where you'd expect. The overhead fluorescence flickered once, twice, then blazed to life. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. McGinty's looked exactly like it must have the night the old man disappeared. 9 pool tables in perfect rows, green felt pristine. Cue sticks in their wall racks, arranged by length. The bar along the back wall still had bottles on the shelves, though dust had turned their labels gray. A Coca-Cola clock above the register showed 11:47, and I wondered if that was the exact time McGinty walked out and never came back. But it was the silence that got me. Not normal quiet. This was the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, made you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing, made you feel like an intruder in a place that didn't want you there. Third table from the back, corner pocket. I counted as I walked. 1, 2. The floorboards didn't creak under my weight, which seemed wrong. Old buildings always creaked. It's like they're talking to you, telling you their stories. But McGinty's stayed silent. The third table looked identical to the others. Regulation size, green felt, leather pockets. I ran my hand along the rail, feeling for anything unusual. Nothing. Checked the other pockets. Empty. Then I reached the corner pocket mentioned in the note. My fingers found something that shouldn't have been there. A seam in the leather, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. I pressed and felt something give way. A hidden compartment built into the table itself. Inside was another envelope, older than the first, yellow with the age. My name was written on it in my father's handwriting. No mistaking it this time. Those careful numbers he'd made as an accountant, adapted to letters. My hands shook as I opened it. Jake, if you're reading this, then they've finally decided it's time. I'm sorry, I wanted to protect you from this, but some things can't stay buried forever. Look under the table. Use the key. And whatever you do, don't trust anyone who claims they knew me from the hall. Dad. I dropped to my knees, pool hall dust coating my jeans. Felt along the underside of the table until I found it. A small metal box, secured with a padlock. The brass key from the first envelope slid in perfect. Inside the box, a photograph, a copper coin I didn't recognize, and a third envelope. The photograph showed 4 men around a pool table. I recognized my father immediately, maybe 25 years old, holding a cue stick and smiling. The other 3 men I didn't know, but something about them made my skin crawl. They were smiling too, but their eyes were looking at something just outside the frame, all 3 of them. Looking at the same spot with expressions I couldn't read. The coin was old, worn smooth except for strange symbols around the edge. Felt heavier than it should, like it was made of something denser than copper. When I held it up to the light, the symbols seemed to shift, probably just a trick of my eyes. Had to be. The 3rd envelope contained a single sheet of paper, not a letter this time. A list of names: McGinty, Terrence, October 15, 2001, Vasquez, Maria, March 3, 2003, Chen, Howard, August 19, 2007, Morrison, Robert, December 1, 2008, Brennan, Michael, July 6, 2015. My father's name was on the list. So was Tommy Brennan's dad, and Sarah Chen's uncle. All people who had died or disappeared over the years. Natural causes, the obituaries said. Heart attacks, strokes, accidents. At the bottom of the list, in different handwriting, the pattern continues, every 7 years plus or minus 3 months. Next selection, October 2022, this month, this year. That's when I heard the front door close. I hadn't heard it open. That's what made my blood run cold. I hadn't heard it open, but I definitely heard it close. A soft click, like someone trying not to wake a sleeping child. Hello? My voice cracked like I was 13 again. Someone there? No answer. But I could feel it now. That change in air pressure when you're sharing a space with another person. That primitive awareness that you're no longer alone. I shoved the photograph and coin into my pocket, kept the papers in my hand, stood up slowly, trying to see past the pool tables to the entrance. The overhead lights hummed, casting hard shadows between the tables. Perfect places for someone to hide. I found the note, I called out. The one in the door. I'm Robert Morrison's son. Still nothing. But then, a sound, soft as a whisper. Pool balls clicking together. The sound came from table 9. The last table farthest from the door. I couldn't see it clearly from where I stood, just the edge of the green felt and darkness beyond. Click, click, click. Rhythmic, deliberate, like someone tapping out a code. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to bolt for the door. Instead, I found myself walking toward the sound. 1 step, 2, the clicking stopped. Table 9 wasn't empty. A man sat in the shadows beyond it, barely visible in the fluorescent glare. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like a suit from another era. He had his back to me, studying something on the wall. "Excuse me," I started. He turned, and I bit back a scream. The man's face was wrong, not deformed or injured, just wrong in a way my brain couldn't process. Like looking at one of those optical illusions where a face becomes a vase, becomes a face again. Features that shifted when you tried to focus on them. Jake Morrison. His voice sounded normal, pleasant even. Made the wrongness of his face worse somehow. "You look just like your father." "Who are you?" "Someone who's been waiting a very long time." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. We have things to discuss." I stayed standing. My father's dead. Yes. The man, thing, whatever he was, smiled. Or I think he smiled. Hard to tell when his features wouldn't stay still. Heart attack, December 1st, 2008. 3 days after he missed his appointment here. What appointment? The same one Terrence McGinty missed in 2001. The same one Michael Brennan missed in 2015. He pulled out a pocket watch, checked it. The appointment you're about to miss in 17 minutes. My mouth went dry. I don't understand. Your great-grandfather understood when he made the deal in 1933. The man stood, and I realized he was taller than any person had a right to be. 7 feet, maybe 8. Had to duck his head to avoid the light fixtures. Depression was hard on Millbrook. People starving, banks foreclosing, children dying of diseases that empty bellies couldn't fight. He moved to table 9, ran a finger along the felt. Where he touched, the green turned black, then green again. So your great-grandfather and 8 other men came here, to this very room, and they made a bargain. What kind of bargain? The kind that saves a town. He pulled a pool ball from his pocket, not a normal one. This was black as midnight, with symbols that matched the ones on the coin. Millbrook would prosper. The mines would stay open when others closed. The factories would have contracts when others shuttered. Children would grow up strong, all for a very small price. I already knew. Somehow, I already knew. Every 7 years, I whispered. One person, chosen by lottery from among the founding families. They come here, play a game of pool with me, and he shrugged. Win or lose, they don't leave. But their sacrifice ensures another 7 years of prosperity. That's insane. Is it? He gestured toward the window. Look at the towns around you. Brownsville, dead. Donora, dying. Republic, gone. But Millbrook? Millbrook thrives. Your schools stay open. Your hospital stays funded. Your children grow up and find jobs and raise families of their own. All because 9 men understood that sometimes you have to feed the wolf to keep it from your door. You're talking about human sacrifice. I'm talking about community service. His face shifted, and for a moment I swear I saw my father's features in that chaos. Your father understood. He came when called, played his game. Lost, unfortunately, but he played. He had a heart attack at home. My mother was with him. Bodies have to be found somewhere. Stories have to be told. Do you think Terence McGinty really left a sandwich half-eaten? Do you think Maria Vasquez really drove her car off Milburn Bridge? He pulled out that pocket watch again. 11 minutes now. I backed towards the door. I'm not playing any game with you. Then Millbrook dies. He said it simple as that. The mine closes first. They're already talking about it, aren't they? Then the hospital loses its funding. The schools consolidate with Valley Heights. One by one, the lights go out. Until this is just another dead Pennsylvania town full of empty houses and memories. You're lying. Your father thought so too. Missed his first appointment. 3 days later, his heart stopped. The man pulled out more of those black pool balls, setting them on the table in a pattern I didn't recognize. But he'd left instructions. If he died before his time, his son would be called in his place. The deal must be honored. I won't. Your guitar student, Emma Rodriguez. He smiled, and this time I was sure of it. Lovely family. Her father just got promoted at the mine, didn't he? Shift supervisor, good insurance, enough to cover her little brother's asthma medication. My blood turned to ice. Don't. I don't have to do anything. That's the beauty of it. I'm not some monster who comes in the night. I'm just an absence. When I'm not fed, I stop holding back the darkness that was always there. The mine shaft that's one inspection away from closing. The funding that's one vote away from disappearing. The cancer that's one missed screening away from spreading. He racked the black balls, pulled a cue stick from the wall. Not wood, something that gleamed like oil in the light. 8 minutes, Jake. Play the game or explain to Emma's parents why Daddy's job disappeared. Explain to the Petersons why the hospital can't afford his heart medication anymore. Explain to everyone why Millbrook is joining the graveyard of Pennsylvania towns. I thought about running. Thought about calling the cops. thought about a dozen things that might save me from this moment. Instead, I picked up a cue stick. Excellent choice. The thing wearing almost human features chalked his cue with something that wasn't chalk. Black dust that fell like ash, disappearing before it hit the floor. Do you know the rules? It's pool. Everyone knows the rules. Not this pool. He gestured to the table. The black balls he'd racked didn't have numbers. Just those symbols, writhing like living things. This is older than your 8-ball or 9-ball. Older than billiards. Old as the first wager between light and dark. The regular cue ball sat on the table's edge. White as bone, normal as anything. But when I picked it up, it felt warm. Pulse warm. Alive warm. Simple rules, he continued. Sink the balls in order of the pattern. The symbols will tell you which comes next if you can read them. First, to clear their designated balls wins. What happens if I win? You leave, Millbrook prospers. The deal continues with someone else in 7 years. And if I lose, that shifting face almost formed a sympathy expression. Almost. Then you become part of the hall, part of the pattern. Your body will be found somewhere sensible, with a sensible explanation. And Millbrook thrives for another 7 years on your sacrifice. I lined up my break shot. My father lost. Your father refused to play until it was too late. By then, his heart was already marked. He barely managed 3 shots before a shrug. The game takes what it's owed, one way or another. I struck the cue ball harder than I meant to. It cracked into the black formation with a sound like breaking bones. The balls scattered, but not randomly. They moved in patterns, curved in ways that ignored physics. One ball stopped dead in the center of the table, spinning in place. Another rolled uphill along the felt before settling in a corner pocket. Interesting break. He studied the table. You've pocketed the 3rd sign. That gives you the opening pattern. I looked at the ball in the corner pocket. The symbol on it hurt to focus on, like trying to stare at the sun. But the longer I looked, the more it made sense. Not sense like understanding, sense like remembering. Like something in my blood recognized it. The mine, I whispered. Very good. The 3rd sign marks the mining pattern. Your great-grandfather's contribution to the original deal. He lined up his own shot, sank a ball with casual precision. He understood that prosperity needs strong foundations, literally in Millbrook's case. I watched the ball disappear into the pocket. Where it should have dropped into the ball return, there was only darkness. Deep, endless darkness that seemed to pull at the light around it. My turn. I studied the remaining balls, trying to see which symbol matched the pattern I'd started. They shifted and swam before my eyes, but one seemed clearer. I aimed, shot, missed by inches. Doubt, the thing said, taking his position. It's what killed your father. He doubted the game, doubted the deal, doubted his role in it all. Another perfect shot. Another ball swallowed by darkness. But you're different, aren't you? You've always known Millbrook was special, always felt the weight of something watching over the town. He was right. Growing up, I'd felt it. That sense that Millbrook existed in a bubble, protected from the worst of what happened to small Pennsylvania towns. Friends who left always came back, drawn by something they couldn't name. Businesses that should have failed found last-minute salvation. Tragedies that struck other places passed us by. I'd thought we were just lucky. My next shot sank true. The ball disappeared into that hungry darkness, and I felt something shift. Not in the room, in me, like a door opening in my mind. The Rodriguez family, I said, not knowing why. They were supposed to move to Ohio. Jose had a job offer, better money, but Emma was born premature, the hospital bills. And Millbrook's hospital had just received an anonymous donation, enough to cover everything, enough to convince them to stay. The thing smiled. Your father arranged that 3 days before his appointment here. He knew he might not leave, so he made sure Emma's family would be okay. How do you know that? Because everyone who plays learns the truth. The game shows you Millbrook's real history, every saved life, every avoided disaster, every family kept whole because someone sat where you're sitting now. Another shot, another revelation. I saw Mrs. Patterson's son, my old classmate David, drunk, 17, driving too fast on Route 19. Saw his car hit the guardrail, flip, roll, should have died. But the guardrail held in just the right way, crumpled in just the right pattern. David walked away with bruises. The guardrail was replaced the next day, paid for by town maintenance funds that shouldn't have existed. Every miracle has a price, the thing said, sinking another ball. Every fortune demands a sacrifice. The founding families understood this. They bled for Millbrook, and Millbrook thrived. I was down to 3 balls. He had 2. The game was closer than it should have been. Him with his centuries of experience, me with shaking hands and a mind full of impossible truths. Why tell me this? I asked, lining up my shot. Why show me how it works? Because you need to understand what you're playing for. Not just your life, the life of everyone you've ever cared about. Every family that stays together, every child that grows up safe, every dream that finds fertile soil in this little town. I missed. The cue ball stopped a hair's width from my target. He studied the table, that shifting face thoughtful. Your father asked the same question. I told him the truth, that understanding makes the sacrifice meaningful. A death in ignorance feeds nothing, but a death chosen, a death understood, that has power, that can sustain a community for years. His shot was perfect, of course. 1 ball left for each of us. But there's something else, he continued. Something I didn't tell your father. Would you like to know? I nodded, not trusting my voice. The deal can be changed, not broken, never broken, but changed, evolved. The founding families were desperate men who made a desperate bargain. But their descendants, he gestured to me. You have options they never dreamed of. What kind of options? Win the game, then we talk. My last ball mocked me from across the table. An impossible angle, blocked by his remaining ball. I'd need to bank it off 2 rails, thread it between a gap barely wide enough to fit through. The kind of shot you see in movies, not real life. But as I studied it, that door in my mind opened wider. I saw my father standing in this same spot, facing this same shot. Saw him gauge the angle, test the weight of the cue. Saw him smile. Pool's just geometry, Jake, he'd told me once, teaching me to play in our basement. Angles and force. Know those, and you can make any shot. I calculated, visualized, breathed. The cue ball struck with a crack like thunder. Rolled left, caught the rail, rebounded at exactly 47 degrees. Hit the second rail, angled back, passed between his ball and mine with a whisper of clearance. My black ball rolled toward the corner pocket. Slowed, stopped at the very edge, then dropped. The room exhaled. Or maybe that was me. The thing across the table set down his cue, and for the first time all night, his face settled into something almost human. Well played. He pulled out that pocket watch one last time. Midnight. The appointed hour passes, and you remain. Millbrook is safe for another 7 years. That's it? That's never it. He walked to the bar, pulled down 2 glasses and a bottle of something amber. Now, we discuss those options I mentioned, the ways to change the deal, to evolve it into something less final. He poured, handed me a glass. The liquid smelled like copper and rain. The founding families thought death was the only currency that mattered, but there are other sacrifices, other prices that can be paid. He raised his glass. To your father. He would have liked to hear this part. I drank. It burned like memory. Tasted like sorrow. Tell me. Service, he said simply. 7 years of service instead of a single death. The selected person becomes a caretaker, maintains the hall, maintains the bargain, ensures the game is played when the time comes. McGinty was supposed to be the first. I offered him the same choice, but he was old, set in his ways, chose the original bargain instead. That almost human face showed something like regret. Since then, I've made the offer to each player. Your father was the first to win the game, the first to earn the right to choose. But his heart, he'd already had one attack, kept it secret from everyone but Mom. I finished the drink, felt it settle warm in my stomach. He knew he didn't have 7 years to give. So he chose the original path, but he made sure you'd have the option he didn't. I set down the glass, walked to the window. Outside, Millbrook slept peaceful under October stars. The diner across the street, the hardware store, Emma Rodriguez's house 3 blocks down, all of it fragile as spun glass, precious as breath. What would I have to do? As caretaker? Keep the hall ready. Keep the records updated. When the 7 years pass, send the invitation. Ensure the game is played. He joined me at the window. And in between, live your life, teach guitar, sell hardware, be part of the community you're saving. Would people know? Some would guess. The smart ones always do, but knowing and understanding are different things. He pulled out a key different from the brass one I'd used. This one was black iron, old as sin. The choice is yours. Take the key, accept 7 years of service, and walk out of here tonight. Or refuse, and trust that the next name drawn will be as lucky as you were. I thought about Tommy Brennan, Sarah Chen, all the families tied to that original bargain. Thought about Emma Rodriguez learning guitar, her little brother breathing easy on good insurance. Thought about my father playing this game with a bad heart and worse odds. Thought about Millbrook surviving when so many towns died. I took the key. It was heavier than the brass one, colder, but it fit my hand like it was made for it. The hall is yours until October 17th, 2029. The thing that looked almost human said, "Keep it well." What about you? For the first time all night, his face fully resolved. Just for a moment. Long enough for me to see he looked tired. So deeply, endlessly tired. I'll be here when needed. The game requires a dealer, after all. He walked toward the shadows at the back of the hall. Your father would be proud. You played better than he did. Wait, I called out before he could disappear. What are you? He paused, not turning. I'm what Millbrook made me. What 9 desperate men called into being with their need and their fear and their love for this place. I'm the wolf you feed to keep the other wolves away. Do you have a name? I had one, once, but names are for things that can leave. He stepped into the shadow and was gone. Good night, Jake. Mind the lights when you lock up. I stood alone in McGinty's pool hall, holding a black iron key and the weight of my town's survival. Outside, a dog barked. A car passed. Normal sounds of a normal night in a town that wasn't normal at all. I turned off the lights, locked the door behind me. The brass doorknob was cold again, resisting my pull like it should. Tomorrow, kids would press their faces to the windows and see nothing but shadows and dust. Tomorrow, life would go on. But tonight, I walked home knowing why the old pool hall stays locked, and why sometimes it opens. The next morning, I found a package on my doorstep. no return address. Inside, a ledger thick with decades of entries, names and dates going back to 1933. Notes in different handwriting, different inks. The real history of Millbrook, written by those who kept it safe. The last entry was my father's. Jake wins. The choice is his. I pray he chooses better than I could. I added my own entry. October 17th, 2022. Game played. Deal changed. 7 years of service begins. JM. Then I made coffee, walked to work, sold a hammer to Mrs. Patterson. Normal things on a normal day. But the black iron key hung heavy in my pocket, and I found myself counting. 7 years. 2,505 days. 61,320 hours. It seemed like forever. It seemed like nothing. That night, I went back to the hall. Alone this time, with purpose. Cleaned the tables, polished the brass, made sure everything was ready, just in case. You never know when someone might need to play a game. And sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm locking up, I swear I hear my father's voice. Faint as memory, sure as love. Good shot, son. Good shot. But here's what keeps me up at night. What makes me check the locks twice and count the days until 2029. I found something else in that ledger. A pattern in the names. The founding families weren't chosen randomly back in 1933. They were specific, calculated. 9 families whose bloodlines, when traced back far enough, all led to the same place. To the same person, Josiah Millbrook, the town's founder. The man who built the first building. A tavern with a gaming room in the back, a room with 9 tables, a room that burned down in 1855, killing everyone inside. Everyone except Josiah. And now I wonder, was the thing in the hall really called into being by desperate men? Or was it always here, waiting, playing the long game, generation after generation, feeding on sacrifice and growing stronger? I wonder what happens when all 9 bloodlines have served, when the pattern completes itself. I wonder what Josiah Millbrook was playing for all those years ago. And I wonder if I'm playing the same game, or if the game is playing me. But that's a mystery for another night. For now, I keep the hall, count the days, and protect my town. Because whatever the truth is, whatever price we're really paying, one thing remains certain. Millbrook survives. Millbrook always survives. Even if we're feeding the wolf that's been here all along. Sweet dreams, listeners. And if you live in a small town that seems luckier than it should be, maybe ask yourself why. Maybe look for the locked doors, the places no one talks about. Maybe wonder what your ancestors agreed to in the desperate dark. Or maybe don't. Some doors stay locked for a reason. Some games are better left unplayed. Until next time, this is Jake Morrison, caretaker of McGinty's Pool Hall, signing off. Mind the shadows, check your locks, and remember, every miracle has a price, every single one.